In this video, we are going to be demonstrating how to work the knit stitch. So in the previous video, we've cast on 8 stitches onto the needle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 there. All of my loops are at the bottom. I am still holding that tail out of the way with the left hand needle in my left hand. And you just want to, it's a good idea just to make sure that those stitches aren't too tight and can still slide comfortably along that needle there. Alright, so this is very similar to the way that we cast on. So you just take your right hand needle, insert it into that loop that is closest to the tip on the left hand needle, so going from left to right through the loop, even though you're holding your needle at a different angle, pointing to the left instead of pointing to the right. So you can see here it's gone inside that loop. It can be really easy to think you've inserted it through, but you have actually gone in between the first and the second stitch. So just make sure that you're actually inside that loop there. Okay. So, oops. Make sure that your yarn is always behind the needles there when you're working the knit stitch. Mine had just slipped to the front, which would have made a mess. So yarn at the back, wrap it in an anti-clockwise direction around right hand needle only, and then I like to place my finger there just to guide that needle through and to prevent the yarn from falling off that needle. So as you pull that needle out, you want to start to point it towards your left shoulder. That just helps to scoop up the yarn as you're coming through, the yarn that you've looped around. Now I like to give it just a little tug just to make sure it's nice and loose. Not the big tug that we did when casting on. Just a little one so it's comfortable around that right hand needle. Now to make sure it doesn't get any longer, I like to place my right finger just holding it on top there, and then you just carefully, instead of putting it onto the left needle, you are carefully, with this stitch that you've pulled that stitch through, you are just carefully going to push that off the tip there. So we now have 7 stitches on the left, 1 on the right. So you cast on 8, you will always have 8 stitches. So once again, to keep working the knit stitch, just insert that right hand needle through the loop. You can give this yarn coming from the ball a little tug if your first stitch is looking a bit loose like mine was there. Again, not too tight. You want to keep it comfortable. So just wrap it anti-clockwise around the tip of your right hand needle. Pull that needle out, turning your needle to help you catch that yarn. A little tug, hold on to those, and you can use this same motion, bringing it back to the right, to pull that left stitch off. So now we have 6 and 2. So insert your right hand needle, wrap the yarn around, guide that needle through, and pull it out, taking off that left needle as you go. Insert, wrap anti-clockwise, push that through, turning your needle to catch it, a little tug to keep it nice and loose, and pulling that left stitch off. If you're not confident about pulling that needle off, you can, of course, just guide it with your left hand and nudge it off that way. So insert, wrap it around. As you can see, when I wrap it around, I like to kind of catch it underneath that left hand needle. That also helps to make sure it's not going to fall off. If you have a big loop that's just hanging there, it's easier that it will fall off when you're pulling your needle out. So when I wrap, I give it just a little tug so that it gets pinched like that between the left and the right hand needle, and then guide my needle through and that yarn's already kind of sitting in the position to be scooped up. So there we go. Insert, wrap, pinching it in, guide that right needle out, little tug, holding on. There you go. Last one here. So insert, wrap around, guide that out, little tug, and then with that last stitch you can simply just remove your left altogether. So we have here 8 knit stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 there on the right hand needle. To continue working, all that you have to do is switch that right needle to your left hand, turning it around like that. So again, make sure that when you have your 2 needles working, that the yarn is at the back and not at the front. There we go. So continue working. Again, I'm just going to hold that tail out of the way. I have accidentally started knitting with that tail, and then I've come to the end and realized I've been using the wrong yarn, which is why I like to hang on to it for as long as I can. Okay, so to continue knitting, you just do the exact same thing. So your stitches are always moving from the left hand needle to the right hand needle. There we go. From the left hand needle to the right hand needle. Now, if you ever put down your knitting in the middle of a row like this and then come back to it and can't remember which one was where, your yarn coming from your ball will always be on the needle that was to your right, because the stitch that you've just made, there we go, there's the stitch, is living on the right hand needle. So you won't come back to it. Oops. And knit with it this way. You want to come back to it and knit with that ball yarn there. So I'm just going to quickly finish this row. If you are worried about it as well, and you don't have too many stitches on your needle, so it's not going to be so tedious, it is a good idea every row, or at least every few rows, just to make sure that you have the same number of needles that you the same number of stitches that you started with. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that just lets you know that you haven't dropped anything, nothing's fallen off, or you haven't accidentally created a second stitch in there. So there we have it, 2 rows of the knit stitch.